Hi, Salma from Nordcraft here, and welcome back to the Learn Nordcraft video series. In this lesson, we're going to build a multi-language website that sells chairs for pets. You'll fetch content from DatoCMS and use Nordcraft's native GraphQL Explorer to build your queries and fetch data according to the selected locale. You'll learn about adding services, using GraphQL, using context for sharing state across different parts of the app, and we'll also go over some things we learned in previous lessons, including events, workflows, formulas, and variables. If you're new to Nordcraft and you haven't watched the previous lessons, I would highly recommend starting from the beginning. But if you're caught up, go to the Learn Nordcraft repository on GitHub and open up lesson 5. The link is in the description. And just like in previous lessons, I've set up a starter project for you so you can get into the lesson content straight away. And we'll start the lesson by cloning this project to our Nordcraft account. Welcome to Learn Nordcraft Lesson 5. This is the app we're going to be building in this lesson, Chairs for Pets. It's a fake e-commerce site. It has one page to get you started with localizing an entire website. All of the content is stored in the CMS, so everything is localized and translated. We've got menu links, there's a label for the language selector, and a hero component, some categories with descriptions, and some reviews. This is DatoCMS, it's where everything is stored for this lesson, and here are all of the models for all of the content. The menu link, for example, has a title, a URL, and an order, and some of the fields on some of the models are localized. Some of them don't need to be localized, such as order and URL. This is the data for the hero component, heading, subheading, CTA text, tagline, and an image, which does not need to be localized. We've got the review model. The copy model provides small bits of copy on a page, such as the title for the review section. The categories are all here with localized titles and descriptions, and the page model provides titles and descriptions that are translated for the metadata and the Open Graph data. You may want to use a browser extension that helps with locale switching if you're building a website that uses many locales, because we are going to be trying to get the default locale from the user's browser and falling back to English if we don't support that locale in the CMS. I've been using this one, Locale Switcher. It works in Chromium browsers, but there are so many available, so pick what you like. In the Learn Nordcraft repository on GitHub, you have everything you need to get started. If you go over to lesson 5, there is the starter project link to clone that to your Nordcraft account. You can also view the finished project or view the finished project in the Nordcraft editor. And this is what you'll need to connect to DatoCMS inside Nordcraft if you don't want to set up your own CMS and models. Everything is done for you. You can connect to the DatoCMS project that I've created. This is the starter project you'll be using for the lesson. It is pre-styled, so you don't need to do any CSS in this lesson, and everything is scaffolded out for you, ready to connect real data from DatoCMS. Hover over the built-in Nordcraft badge and click Clone this app. After you've clicked Clone, we're going to create a new branch so we can start working. We're going to call this Start. So the structure of the app is this. We have everything wrapped in a locale provider, which is going to provide the locales to us and deal with fetching the supported locales from the CMS. There's a header component, a hero component, and then in the main section, there are a categories component, a reviews component, and this little built-in Nordcraft component that I'm just going to delete while I'm working. The first thing we're going to do is connect to the DatoCMS service. On the Lesson 5 GitHub repo, you'll find the read-only token that you'll need to connect to DatoCMS. So click to copy that. Head over to the project sidebar in Nordcraft and click the plus button next to Services. We're going to choose a DatoCMS service that is a GraphQL service. Click on that. Let's call it DatoCMS, and in the setup area, paste in the read-only token. And we have a connection established. Everything is good. Press the tick button. We're going to be storing the user's preferred locale as a cookie, a browser cookie. And the first thing we want to do is on this home page, get the value of that cookie if it exists, or provide a sensible default to provide to the locale provider. So let's create a variable on the home page and we're going to call it locale. We're going to use a formula to calculate this value for the locale. First of all, we're going to see if a cookie exists that the locale provider will end up setting every time the language is changed. So we're going to find the get cookie formula, and the cookie that we're going to be saving is going to have a name of locale. If that doesn't exist, we're going to find the default to formula, and we're going to use the languages formula, which gets an array of preferred languages for the user. And it's based on the navigator.languages property on the client in the browser. We're going to take the first one of that. So we're going to find the first formula. Now, some locales are more specific and are, for example, ENGB or ENUS, and some locales are just 2 characters. For our purposes and the way I've set up localization in DatoCMS, we just need 2 characters. So we're going to take the first 2 of that first language available from the languages formula. So what we're doing here is we are getting a cookie if it exists. If not, we're defaulting to the first language provided by the client or the browser and just taking the first 2 characters of that. Now let's go into the locale provider component. We're going to add an attribute and we're going to call this locale. Let's have a test value of en. And now if we go back to the home page, we can pass in that locale variable as the locale attribute on the locale provider component. So press the formula button here next to locale and we'll pass in locale. Now in the locale provider component, we want to call the CMS to get supported locales. Now we've already connected to the DatoCMS service, so everything we need is already hooked up and we just need to build a GraphQL query. So I'm going to create a new API by pressing the plus button next to APIs. I'm going to select the DatoCMS service. This is the native GraphQL Explorer in Nordcraft. You can use it to build all of your GraphQL queries without needing to refer to any other documentation or any other GraphQL explorers. What I love about GraphQL is that everything is self-documenting. Everything available in your CMS is right here in front of you, so it's your documentation. It's kind of self-documenting when you use GraphQL APIs. So I'm just going to rename this to locales. And we're going to add a field and we're going to choose site. And here we can click on the locales field. And here you'll see that the supported locales in DatoCMS for this project are EN and DA, English and Danish. We now want to be able to expose these supported locales to the rest of the app to avoid sending attributes up and down child and parent components. So for this, we're going to use context. Just a quick look at the documentation. Context enable direct communication between ancestor and descendant components without going through intermediate components. So this allows you to avoid attribute drilling, which is where you pass data through lots and lots of different components if it's needed. So with the context, you can just grab that value, subscribe to that context, and use it without needing to drill down any data. To expose some data in the context, we need to create a formula on this component. So we're going to click the plus button next to formulas. We're going to call this supported locales. And we're going to click the checkbox here, expose in context. Now this is going to expose the data that we got from the API just now. And so we're going to choose the locales API, data, site, locales. And you see the output here, we have EN and DA. Now, because of some quirks of the Nordcraft editor, these locales will be available on the preview link as context, but if you want to view supported locales inside the editor, we'll need to provide like a little bit of a fallback, kind of a test value for the context. And we can do this with default 2, and I'm going to create an array, and I'm going to create an array with EN, DA, and ES, just so I know that I'm looking at test data because this locale is not supported in the CMS. Next, we're going to create a formula and expose this in the context for the preferred locale. This is the bit of data that all of the APIs on other components are going to use, which don't have access to a browser cookie on a page. And this is what's going to avoid that attribute drilling down into other components. So let's create another formula. We'll call this locale preferred. And here we need to do a little bit of logic to see if we actually support the locale, otherwise we're going to fall back to English. So we're going to add an if statement, and we're going to check if supported locales includes that attribute value passed in, which is the value from the cookie. If we do support that locale, we're going to set the preferred locale to that attribute. If not, we're going to fall back to use EN. And make sure to click Expose in Context on Locale Preferred. Next, we want to create a workflow inside the locale provider to be triggered every time somebody changes the language on the language select dropdown. So let's create a workflow and we'll call it Update Locale. We want to expose this one in context so that the header and the language select dropdown has access to this workflow. We want to add a parameter to this workflow, and we're going to call it locale. And let's have a test value of DA, just so we can see that in the workflow tree below. When we update the locale, we want to set a cookie. And the name of this cookie is going to be locale. And the value of this cookie is going to be the locale parameter from the workflow. And then we need to emit an event so that all of the rest of the app knows that the locale has changed. So we're going to add an event. We're going to call it locale changed. And the data we're just going to be emitting with this event is just the locale string. So for example, we can set this test value to DA. Back in the update locale workflow, we're also going to trigger that locale changed event. So at the bottom of here below set cookie, we're going to trigger locale changed, and we're going to pass in that locale parameter that's on the workflow. Now you'll see some warnings here next to locale preferred and the update locale workflow, and that's because we're not using them yet. So let's use them. From the project sidebar, let's go into the header component. So here we have everything set up ready to be rendered with data from the CMS. We have a header with a nav, an ordered list with a sample menu link. We have another section over here with a label for the language select dropdown, and we have the select dropdown with an option ready for us to populate with the supported locales from the CMS. The first thing we want to do is subscribe to the locale provider. So in the context section here on the right, we're going to click plus, and we're going to subscribe to everything. Click the checkboxes next to locale preferred, supported locales, and the update locale workflow. Next, we're going to add an API to get the menu data and the copy text for the select language label. So let's add an API. And let's select DatoCMS. I'm going to rename this to menu and select label. Now, the great thing about GraphQL is that you can get every bit of data that you need in one API call. So we're going to add the fields to find the menu links and that copy for the select label. So first we're going to add a field, and we're going to find all menu links. We're going to pass in the locale to the query to get only the menu links for the selected locale. I'm going to click on the cog menu here and we're going to type in locale to create a variable. So now click on the Variables tab at the top and we can use the FX button to get the preferred locale from the locale provider context. Here we can select locale preferred. Back on the Query tab, we need to select some fields for the menu links. So we're going to find the title and the URL. I also want to get the order because I've defined how I want my menu links to be ordered in the CMS. We're going to order the menu links by order ascending. And now you can see already in the response panel that we have home, shop, contact. And these are in English because currently my selected locale is English. Next, I want to get the copy for the select label for the language select dropdown. So we're going to add another field and we're going to find copy. On the copy model, there is a slug, which makes it easy to fetch that data by something that doesn't really change. So we're going to filter this copy query and filter it by the section slug that is equal to lang_select. Click on the drop down next to filter. We're going to find section slug, click on that drop down, and it's going to equal lang_select. We're going to pass in the locale here as the locale. And we want to make sure that we just get the section text for the lang select. And here we have down here, copy select language in English. That's all the data we need for this header. Now we can wire it up. So for the menu links, we are going to use the repeat formula to repeat over the menu links that we get from the CMS. So if you click on the LI tag here, go to the Attributes tab or press A, and we're going to use the repeat formula here. We're going to choose the Menu and Select Label API. We're going to choose Data, Data, All Menu Links, and here we already have 3 menu links in this output. Close the formula editor, and on the A tag here, we are going to render out the links. So on the Attributes tab for the A tag where it says href, we're going to use the formula editor here. We are going to concatenate a / with the item URL. On the text inside the menu link, we're going to use the formula editor to render out the item title. And there we have home, shop, contact. Just for safety, we're going to add a repeat key to the list item as well, and we can just use the index. Moving down to the label for the language select dropdown, we can click on the text for select label, and we're going to use the formula editor to find the string from the CMS. Copy, section text, select language. Now we're going to generate all of the supported locales inside the select dropdown. So click on the option, and here is where we're going to use the context, the supported locales. Technically, you could call the site API in every component on every page to get the supported locales, but providing those locales in the context avoids all of those unnecessary API calls. So we're going to head over to the repeat formula on the option tag, and we're going to find the supported locales from the context. And here we have 3 supported locales. Remember that we're using ES in our test data because the Nordcraft editor doesn't call APIs outside of the component as we're editing it. We're going to add another repeat key for safety. So we've got the index, and the value attribute on the option is going to be the value of the item. So let's click on the FX button next to value, and let's choose item. Let's close that formula editor, and we want to make sure that the selected option in the dropdown reflects the preferred locale in the context. So click on the FX button next to selected. We're going to do if locale preferred equals the item, that's when it's going to be selected. Next, we want to update this lang text inside the option to the item text. So click on the lang, click on the FX button, and we'll choose item. So all of the data is wired up from the CMS and the context inside the header component. And now we want to make sure that when we use the select dropdown to change the locale, that the workflow is called on the locale provider and everything else can respond accordingly. So let's click on the select element here and let's go over to the events tab or press E, and we're going to add an event on change. So if you expand the input group, you'll find the change event. Click on that. And when we change the select dropdown, we want to call the update locale workflow. And into that workflow, we want to pass the event target value. So every time that select dropdown is changed, it's going to call the update locale workflow in the locale provider component. So we can see the menu and select label update when we change the language without having to recall the API again after the change event. We need to trigger an event on the home page to update the variable that's passed in as an attribute to the locale provider. So if we go back to the home page and click on locale provider and go to the events tab. Here we can do some things when the locale has been changed, because on the select dropdown, we are triggering the update locale workflow inside the locale provider, which then triggers this locale changed event. So if we click on locale changed, we're going to set the locale variable to the value of the event. And then we're going to create a custom action to update the lang attribute on the HTML tag. So let's go over to the project sidebar, scroll down to actions, and let's create a custom action. We're going to call this update HTML lang. The argument we're passing in is locale, and it is a string. And here we're going to use some basic JavaScript. We're going to use document.querySelector, and we're going to find the HTML tag. And we're going to set attribute lang, and we're going to set it to args.locale. Back on that locale changed event on the home page, we are going to call that custom action, update HTML lang, and we're going to pass in the event parameter. So now if we preview this in a new tab, and you'll see that if we change the language, we already get that localized content from the CMS in that header component. And you'll also see in the application tab in cookies that we've got a locale cookie here saved. At the moment, the value is en. When I change the language select to DA, that cookie updates accordingly. So the whole system that we're using to localize this website is already set up, and now it's just time to hook all of that up to all of the other components. So now let's go into the hero component from the home page. Let's first subscribe to the context, and the only context we need is the locale preferred, and that's what we're going to use to get the correct content from the CMS. Let's add a new API. Let's select DatoCMS, and we'll rename this API to hero. Let's find a field. Let's search for hero, select that. We're going to pass in the locale. We're going to create a variable again, and we are going to use the value from the context, the locale preferred. Back on the query tab, we're going to find the fields we need for our hero. We need CTA text, heading, the subheading and the tagline. And inside the image, we want the alt, the height, the width, and the URL. Here we have the CTA text, the heading, everything we need for the image, the subheading, and the tagline. Now let's hook that data up to all of our HTML tags. Let's find the image, and over on the Attributes tab, we're going to use the FX button next to Alt. We're going to find the data from the API, hero, data, data, hero, image, Alt. There it is, a Yorkshire Terrier on a chair in a kitchen. Let's close that one and let's find the source for the image. Hero, data, data, hero, image, URL. Close that and let's get the width and the height. Let's find the width from the hero, data, data, hero, image, width. And for the height, hero, data, data, hero, image, height. Perfect. Now let's click on the text element inside the H2. This is the subheading. Let's use the formula button here next to text and get hero, data, data, hero, subheading. On the H1, let's get the heading on the text element here. Let's press the FX button. Let's get hero, data, data, hero, heading. Chairs for pets. Let's do the same on the tagline. Let's select the text element, click the FX button next to text. Let's find from the API hero, data, data, hero, tagline. And finally, for the CTA text here, let's click on that text element. Let's go to the FX button here next to text and find hero, data, data, hero, CTA text. And that's everything we need for the hero. Again, we can preview this and watch the content update in real time when we change the language in the language select. We're already on Danish, so this is showing you that because I selected Danish previously and the cookie has been set in my browser, that's the default that it's presenting me with now because that's how we set it up. So I'll change to English and we'll see the hero content change and change back to Danish. And now that's all to do is to get the content for categories and reviews in the same way. Let's go back into the home page and let's choose the categories component. Just as in the hero component, we only need to subscribe to the locale preferred context. So let's click the plus button next to context and get the locale preferred. And now we can create the API for the categories. So let's click plus next to APIs. So let's choose DatoCMS. And let's add a field. Let's find all categories. Let's filter by locale. Let's create a variable called locale. Let's use, again, on the variables tab, the value from the locale preferred context. Close that. Back to the query tab. For the categories, we need the following fields. Let's find the image. Let's get the alt, the height, the URL, and the width. And for the category, we need a short description, a slug, and a title. We can see we've got all our data here in the response panel. Just going to rename the API to categories. And now we're ready to render out that data. We're going to use a repeat formula on this A element here. So click on the A element and head over to the Attributes tab. And we're going to use the repeat formula here. Categories, data, data, all categories. So we have 4 categories ready for us. Let's close that. On the image, we are going to get that category image. So head over to the Attributes tab on that image. We're going to find the alt text from that item, image alt. Fun fact, the alt text for all images is also localized in the CMS. So if you are looking at the Danish version of the website, you will also have Danish alt text. I'll demonstrate that to you in a moment. On the source attribute, we are going to choose the item image URL. On the width attribute, we're going to choose the item image width. And on the height, item image height. On the H2 element, we're going to use the category name on the text element, FX button, item title. And on the text element for the P tag, we're going to use the FX button here to get the item short description. And that's our categories. Let's preview that. You'll see here we have all of the categories and descriptions in Danish, just to prove to you that the alt text is also translated on the images. Here is the alt text for this cat image. If I change the language to English, you'll see that the alt text also changes. I think that's just a really nice touch, especially for people who are viewing websites using screen readers who don't speak English or who don't prefer to hear English. I think translating everything you can is really important and really elevates the user experience. Next, we're going to do the same thing for the reviews. If we go into the reviews component, and again, let's subscribe to the locale preferred context. Let's create a new API, connect to DatoCMS. Let's rename this one to reviews. And let's add a field. We want to get all reviews. We're going to pass in the locale as a variable. Get that from the context. Back to the query tab. And what we want from the reviews is quite a lot. We're going to get the avatar, alt, height, width, and URL. And we're going to get the comment, name, and rating. On the finished website, there is also a localized heading title for the reviews section. So we're going to use the same API call to get that string, that bit of copy from the copy model. So let's close up all reviews and let's add another field and find copy. We want to filter the copy by the section slug where it equals reviews. And then we just want to find the section title. And you'll notice down here, when we find the copy section of the response, we get the section title. Let's first add in that section title to the H2. So let's click on the H2 text element, find the FX button, get the reviews API, data, copy, section title. And now we're going to use another repeat formula on all of the reviews. So let's select this second div here. This is the section we're going to repeat. Let's find the attributes tab and let's use a repeat formula. Reviews, data, or reviews. So here we have 3 reviews. Let's close that. Let's get the review image. Click the FX button next to the alt attribute of the image and let's find item, avatar, alt. On the source, let's find the item, avatar, URL. On the width, item, avatar, width. And on the height, item, avatar, height. Perfect. On the P tag, let's click on the text. This is the review comment. Let's go to the FX button here, item, comment. And on the reviewer name, let's find that text element and let's do item, name. Perfect. And for the stars, we are going to translate a review rating of 1 to 5 to how many stars we show on the page. We're going to use a repeat formula on the SVG tag here. So on the attributes tab, we're going to find repeat. And we are going to repeat the item within a range between 1 and what the review rating is. So let's choose range. The min is going to be 1 and the max is going to be the item rating. And as you'll see here, we have 3 stars for my review, 4 stars for Casper's, and 5 for Andreas. Let's preview the whole project on the front end. All right, here we have chairs for pets. Sit, stay, slay, shop now. We've got 4 categories and we've got 3 reviews. If we change the language, we have everything on the page be translated. I don't speak Danish, so I have no idea if my Danish is accurate. Please tell me in the comments if I got anything wrong. We have one more thing to do to make sure this website is truly localized. Let's go back into the editor. Now, the homepage meta currently is static, but we've got a model in the CMS, the page model, which gives us translated content, localized content for the title and description for the pages, which we can also use in the Open Graph data as well. So we're going to call a new API on the home page. Let's choose DatoCMS, and we're going to call this page. Let's add a field and let's find page. We're going to filter this page query where the slug equals home. And we're going to pass in the locale. Again, create a variable. Find the variable from here, the locale variable. And the fields we are going to find on this page model is title and description. And we can use that title and description in the page meta. Open up the page meta options. We are going to get the value from page, data, page, title. On the description, we can get the page, data, page, description. And we can also add these same things to the Open Graph data. So the content on the OG title is page, data, page, title. And the content on the description is page, data, page, description. And just so you can see that in action, let's preview it. So here you'll see everything in English, but if I change the language to Danish, you'll see that the content changes to Danish. And you'll notice with our custom action, the lang attribute also changes on the HTML tag. So that's it. That's your finished multi-language website. You used context to provide a preferred locale to other components without needing to drill any data down into those other components. And you connected to DatoCMS to get all of that content using a GraphQL API based on the user's preferred locale. One tip I would have when you're building multi-language websites is to store everything in a CMS. Try and prevent storing translated strings in your front end. This will make it much easier to update or add any other localized content whenever you need, and it saves you having to root around in your front end code to find translations or translate other strings. That was lesson 5 of the Learn Nordcraft video series, and I'll see you in the next one.